Hello everyone. Today is an incredibly sad day for me. I mean, I'm so torn up, I can't even tell you. I'm just trying to hold it in because Carl Weathers was such an integral part of my life, my success, everything about it. I give him incredible credit and kudos because when he walked into that room and I saw him for the first time, I saw greatness, but I didn't realize how great. I never could have accomplished what we did with Rocky without him. He was absolutely brilliant. His voice, his size, his power, his athletic ability, but more importantly, his heart, his soul. It's a horrible loss. And I'm standing here in front of this painting because it was probably the last moment we were ever in the ring together, and I'll never forget it. He was magic, and I was so fortunate to be part of his life. So, Apollo, keep punching.
This is HBR News number 441. Censoring Satan, DEI is DOA. Teacher transitions 10-year-old, where we discuss the news of the week and give it the Badger treatment. Hello everyone and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. I hope you guys are doing well this week and that you're laughing at all of this absurdity so that you're not consumed by it. My name is Brian and I'm joined by Dr. Random McCam and Hannah Wallen, and we are going to be bringing you the news from a Badgery perspective. On this week's HBR News show, we're going to be following up on the Iowa man who destroyed a satanic altar and like the consequences of that. Florida International University eliminates DEI department, or one of their DEI departments. Racial discrimination is apparently alive and well in the National Organization for Women and more, so stick around, it's going to be a good time. And be sure to join us afterwards for the patron only show. So you guys might, last week we talked about how much of a problem it is that Taylor Swift has been essentially made into pornographic images. I think they called it something else, I forget. It was like intimate fake images done with AI, and how this is a problem, right? Sexualizing women with artificial intelligence is a problem. Well, apparently the opposite is also a problem. So there is this thing called Dignify, or Dignif AI, where they basically take women who are dressed scantily clad and reclothe them. And this is also a problem. So the Daily Caller has this article we're going to be looking at in the patron show called "Some Internet Dork is Trying to Reclothe Beautiful Women Because of Dignity. It is Pathetic."
I love everything about this.
Yeah, I know.
It actually plays on this weird, almost paradoxical truth that, I mean, I've never been to a titty bar, but people who have been to titty bars and strip joints, they're like, they'll see these girls draping themselves over these poles and whatnot, but then they glance over at the barmaid and you can see her cleavage through her shirt, and that's the most exciting nudity in the whole place, because you're not supposed to see it. Just a tiny amount of titillation is far more titillating than the full-on uncensored hoe bag thing going on.
You know the feminists are going to go psycho hose beast about this, though.
They already have.
Oh yeah, they already have. They've completely. They've gone. Like basically, men can't do anything with AI at all.
Yeah. No, it's misogynistic to look at naked women, guys, but it's also misogynistic to put their clothes back on without their consent.
Yeah. So we're gonna look at this article in the patron show, and if you want to become, what was that?
This is gonna be great.
Oh yeah, it's gonna. I think it is. I think it's gonna be. There's gonna be lulls to be had. So if you want to be a part of that, you have to become a Badger yourself by going to feedthebadger.com, setting up a monthly subscription. $5 a month will get you into our Discord, where you'll be able to participate in all of the additional content, including patron shows, and you get to see things before they go live. For example, I believe there's a Ragening there that you can watch right now if you are a patron before it goes live on the tubes. And there's lots of really stimulating and interesting discussions going on in the Discord as well as events and whatnot. So that's feedthebadger.com. Set up a monthly subscription and become a badger so you can enjoy all of this additional content. And if you don't want to wake up one morning to find that we've been yeeted from the mainstream internet for our views or our problematic behaviors, then go to badgerfeed.com or honeybadgerradio.com. That is where our content lives. And without further ado, we're going to get into the story. So first things first, let's talk about Satanism, I guess. So Satan most affected is what I call this.
Wait, when did this become a comedy show?
I know, but let's stick with me. I think it's always been a clown show. I mean, this is like why this show exists. The world has become a joke. So, Michael Cassidy, I think we covered this a while back when it happened. Michael Cassidy, who beheaded a statue put up by the Satanic Temple at Iowa's capital, which is a funny place for a Satanic temple. Iowa is not known for that kind of thing. So anyway, Michael Cassidy has been charged with a felony under the state's hate crime statute. The Polk County's attorney's office charged Cassidy with third-degree criminal mischief in violation of individual rights, a Class D felony under Iowa's hate crime statutes. Cassidy, an unsuccessful Republican candidate for Mississippi State House of Representatives, claimed that he destroyed the statue due to the victim's religion. The Satanic Temple of Iowa had displayed the statue for the holidays, and the damage is deemed beyond repair. Satanic Temple does not believe in Satan or the supernatural, according to their own accounts, promoting effective and artful protest.
According to their own accounts, yeah.
Real Satanism has never been tried.
By the way, I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware that y'all had hate crime laws in the US. I thought it was still limited to the shores of my own eclectic continent, and indeed anywhere else as long as it's fallen to communism. When did that happen? Is it another one of those bills that they called the Love Kittens and Puppies Act, and then they snuck it through Congress in the middle of the night?
It's been around for a long time, and I think I want to say that one of the catalysts was the attack on a man in Texas. It was really horrific. They tied him to the back of a truck and dragged him because he was gay. And so to me, I look at this type of crime, like that type of crime, and it shouldn't matter why you do it. It's brutal. It's a horrific act. It should be penalized and to the fullest extent of the law, and the individuals involved should be put through psychiatric evaluation, because nobody in their right mind would do something like that to another human being. If you can look at another person's actual face in fear and pain and do things like that to them, it's not just hate. There's something else wrong with you, right? There's something going on in your brain. But that kind of incident was used to usher in laws that basically say when you commit a violent crime or when you commit a crime where there is an individual deemed a victim because of what you did, if your reason for doing it is because of the person's skin color, because of the person's religion, their sex, any characteristic that has been deemed immutable, even though now they're allowing you to identify in different ways, so it's questionable whether anything is immutable anymore. It's now a hate crime. It's considered a higher crime. So yeah. It's the other way to think of it is it's more okay to murder somebody for money than it is to murder somebody because you don't like their some characteristic about them, which makes no sense to me, because I think it should not be okay under any circumstances. And it allows something like this, which is simple destruction of property. And it was stupid. I'll give you that. Like, the guy he didn't really accomplish anything doing this except getting himself in trouble. They'll put the statue back up. There will be another one. Nobody is going to change their minds or the way they think about the statue because this guy did this. He probably felt like he needed to do this as the hero of some group, some movement, some religious belief that's in opposition to Satanism and everything. But in reality, it was a completely useless gesture. And it would have been much better to just ridicule the ever-loving fuck out of putting a satanic altar in the courthouse. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. The hate crime law thing, they didn't have to name it something else. They convinced people that it was not what it was going to be. And in reality, it makes no sense at all. You convince people that there are worse reasons and better reasons for committing a premeditated crime that has a victim. The owner of this altar would be the victim, I guess, because it's that group's property. And it's, you know, it's ridiculous to destroy somebody's property even if you don't like it. I mean, there are other ways to handle that situation. But why the individual did it doesn't matter. If it was on purpose, and like, it's not an act of self-defense, like that actually is a legitimate excuse for committing a crime when it's real, like when somebody is actually threatening to harm you, when something is being done to you. But just having something present in a location doesn't injure you, you know, unless it's radioactive. I don't think this is radioactive. So no, we've had those laws in place for quite a while, and they're dumb. There's no point to them other than to create power for some people over other people.
Recent events have left me wondering what this hate crime bill in question even actually said. Was there a clause on page 30,006 saying it's totally fine if you pull down and behead a statue of Thomas Jefferson, and you do it specifically in the name of anti-white sentiments? It's totally fine if you melt a statue of Robert E. Lee and broadcast the footage of his burning death mask, you know, to send a message to any white people or patriots who are thinking of acting up. But Baphomet, no, young bucky. That's a protected figurehead right there. That's an important part of our history. To even breathe near that thing is straight to the gulag with you. Is that what the law said? I doubt it. The government doesn't like to be as specific as that. If we're following the European pattern, then it'll be something like hate is anything that can be perceived as hate. Perceived by whom, you might ask? Whosoever is enforcing the laws. Who might that be? Well, at this point, is people who hate men. Mostly white men, but it clearly started with men, all men. As such, misandry cannot be perceived as hate because men are themselves a form of hate, and any harm we do to them, even vicariously, is actually, by the transitive property, love. Woe betide anyone who loves men. That's the worst kind of hate, namely misogyny. Of course, you can say you love men. You can say you love America. In politics, what you say means diddly squat. Much like what propagandists call the bill is usually the polar opposite of what it actually entails. That Inflation Reduction Act was just about printing even more money. The Border Security Act is about further facilitating and pampering the onslaught of foreign invaders. It comes down to actions. That's actions are what these evil scumbags get away with, and it's what their victims cannot get away with. You can say what you like about men, but if your actions actually reflect applied androphilia, then you're an incel and a misogynist and an evil MRA, and you're on an FBI watch list. You can say you love America, but if you actually make any effort to uphold and protect its culture, its electoral integrity, heaven forbid its borders, fucking jail. Straight to jail. Believe it or not, jail. Case in point, no one in the government will come right out and say, I love Baphomet, but actions speak louder than words. When Satan himself rises to take over the world, he won't even need to disguise himself in a pleasing form. human beings will do the deceiving for him. He could rise out of the ocean like Cthulhu, wings and pitchfork and everything, with 2 middle fingers standing proudly for the cameras, and these scumbags will rabble around him, going, "Everyone leave this poor asylum seeker alone. He's just a child. He was just jogging." And then when Jesus descends from the heavens to fight Satan, they'll call him an insurrectionist and shoot him in the fucking throat. Mark my words. The prophet has spoken. It's probably already happened, actually.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like something that's happening.
It would explain a lot, yeah.
There have been Cthulhu for President rallies where a lot of, Lovecraft nerds stood around and chanted "Eat us first" over and over again. But I don't know how serious.
Well, that sounds
I
sounds
know
like trolling.
That's not incredibly serious, right?
I think that's trolling.
A joke, but it was still a thing that happened. So
sure.
I don't know.
So I have here.
Seriously.
This is the statutes. The statute in Iowa. It reads 729A.2 violation of individual rights, hate crime. Hate crime means one of the following public offenses when committed against a person or a person's property because of the person's race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, political affiliation, sex, sexual orientation, age, or disability, or the person's association with a person of a certain race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, political affiliation, sex, sexual orientation, age, or disability. And then there's like a bunch of sub things. Criminal mischief is here. It says criminal mischief in violation of individual rights under section 716.6a. So yeah, they do have a thing on the books. I don't believe in hate crimes. I just believe in crimes. So, if you chain a guy to the back of a truck and drag him behind you because he's gay, that's terrible, but I think the dragging a person behind the truck is the crime, not the I don't like him because he's gay part. I don't think that's important at all. I don't care what your reasoning is. I just care about the crime, because when you get into, and I know that we're not necessarily in disagreement about that, but like, this is how you take away people's rights. You basically you do it by saying we have to protect people from hate crimes, as if it's a different kind of crime, and it's not. And also it becomes selective. I recall that a black man got behind the wheel of a vehicle and drove into a parade and killed a lot of people and said he did it because they were white, and there was no hate crime charge. And there was a charge because it was, murder with a vehicle or whatever, but it was almost like pointless to even make that a part of it, but obviously people want us to focus on things like race. Now, when it comes to this specific thing, I guess my only question is, like, how do we quantify a religion? Because people will say the Church of Satan is a religion, but I don't think it is. I think it's just people trolling Christians. Like, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like, Satanism does not exist separate from Christianity. It is a part of it, but of course, Satanists would tell you, and I've known some, that they're not really practicing any religion. They're just anti-theists, essentially. And anti-theism, like, I would say that a lot of things could be considered religions, because we as human beings have a religious, like, I think, mind, like the way that we organize things. Like, you just have to look at, like, the Summer of Love, see all of the religious ways that George Floyd was portrayed by people who would claim not to be, to either be agnostic or not religious at all. So it's obviously we do have a behavior towards that, that this kind of like idol worship or some kind of worship. But I don't know that you could classify Satanism as a religion based just because they have their symbols and whatever, because if they're just trolling like the Cthulhu people, then, I don't know that counts. Now, I'm not justifying anything. I think that he destroyed someone's property and there should be penalties, but I think that if we're talking about it in the framework of freedom of religion, I'm not sure that that's the correct, thing to criticize, because I don't know that it's a religion. I know that it sounds nitpicky. And plus, we can see how selective it is, because if you recall, not that long ago, we didn't cover it because it wasn't entirely relevant, but it kind of is now, because you can compare it. There was a guy who was getting ass blasted on the Congress floor, and it was shot it was like filmed and put on the internet and nothing happened to him. So, you know, like, I mean, is that also free expression? Like, and what happened with all of the churches that were burned, you know, in America because of like Roe v. Wade, or in Canada because of the supposed, you know, bodies under the churches. So
that weren't actually there, by the way.
Yeah, that weren't actually there, right? That's why I suppose it. Like, it was never proven. So then I guess the only, I can't fault them for penalizing the guy for destroying property, but I don't think it should be constituted as a hate crime, because I don't think anything should be constituted as a hate crime, regardless of motive, because that is a dangerous precedent to set. And, you know, was it stupid? I don't know that he was trying to like do something, because I saw an interview with the guy and he just said that, you know, he thinks that this is just a step too far, and he is a Christian, and he doesn't believe that Satanism should be normalized. And that was his reasoning. I'm not saying I agree with it or disagree with it, but I understand it. You know? I forgot, I'm not sharing the right tab. So, anyway, that's just what I think about that. I mean, I don't think it's gonna. I think that ultimately it's going to create more sympathy for the Satanists, and that's probably what they want. I mean, if you think about it, like it's the same tactics that.
It seems they're only enforcing these hate crime laws against one particular religion.
Group of people, yeah.
Yeah, they're only doing it to Christians. Yeah.
Christianity, surely that is itself a hate crime, a sort of
yeah, and one could argue that if they're only doing this against Christianity, is that Satanism itself? Like, I don't know.
So,
like,
when I say real Satanism has never been tried, my point is, like you said, a lot of them will tell you that they're not worshiping actual Satan, and they
Right.
do have a religious belief, and it is about old gods and so on. And I'm, as a former practicing pagan, I wasn't Satanist, I was Wiccan, which is probably dumber, but not in some ways not. But I mean, I interacted with Satanists at pagan spirit gatherings and stuff, and a lot of it was basically about rebelling against the concept of religion while still having some degree of spirituality.
It's the religion of no religion.
The concept of religion being the idea of morality as opposed to ethics and everything. And they even sort of had, like, where Wicca and some of the other varieties of pagan witchcraft had a rule where, you know, as long as you're not hurting somebody, you do what you want to, and we didn't have a concept of sin like Christianity has a concept of sin, but right and wrong were concepts, and it's wrong if what you're doing causes harm. Where Satanism, their rule was do what you will shall be the whole of the law, which to me indicates that if you really had to think about it, it's offensive to Satanism to punish this guy for destroying the statue, because who was actually hurt by it? At most, you could say, well, he should have to pay to replace the statue.
Yeah, but they didn't. But I think they are the ones that press charges. So they were hoping someone would do something, so they could use the system to punish them under the precedent of this hate crime law.
And that proves that their beliefs are fake.
Yes.
Like they don't actually believe what they claim to believe. Because if they did, that bit about do what thou will shall be the whole of the law, it doesn't matter, what the consequences are. He was doing what he wanted. So, actually having something in a courthouse where laws other than do what thou will shall be the whole of the law seems a little bit anti-satanic, if you ask me, because they're associating their belief system, the deity being a symbol of the belief system, as opposed to a lot of religions where the belief system stems from the deity. It seems like that would be offensive to them to have a symbol of their religion in a location where the one thing that is a violation of their beliefs is done. The enforcement of law that is not just do what you will. But yeah.
I believe
Neither here nor there, I guess. The main thing is the whole hate crime thing is bullshit. The whole as the concept of hate crime is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, notice that the person who felt like he had to protect the community against this offense was a man.
Yeah, the clause that a lot of Satanists add is do what they will, but harm no one.
No, that's not satanic. That is not satanic.
It's neo-satanic, is it?
No, it is not. It has absolutely nothing to do with Satanism. Satanism doesn't have that. Wicca had it. Wicca has it. Other pagan faiths have it. But Satanism does not. You are allowed to hurt people if you are a Satanist.
All right, but the point is, this guy, in any case, didn't hurt anyone. The only damage he did was to property. And if disrespecting property rights is a hate crime, then you guys have a hell of a lot of communists to arrest for hate crime. Good luck with that.
That's true.
I got to read these super chows, but let us know what you guys think about this in the comments. Richard Bier gives us $5 and says, "But who is producing these consumer goods that women happily spend their money on, that they will dispose of in 6 months?" Is that an old one? Because I don't.
It has
see
to be
that
an old
here,
one,
but it might be. Then I got another one from him, but it disappeared. But it says he gave us $5 and says, "Aldi Supermarket is on the DEI, DIE cult bandwagon as they're overtly advertising their employment opportunities to be excluding white men. Isn't that a dress-up doll program for women's pictures?" I mean, Aldi is a nice store if you're really poor, so I guess, I don't know, but is it racist of them to reflect their customers? Is that what they think they're doing? I have no idea. So I like Aldi though.
They're probably owned by some big corporate entity that's enforcing that on them, or they accept MasterCard and Visa, and we at least know for sure that MasterCard is doing it. They're enforcing DEI on companies by altering how they do business with companies, depending on whether they use it or not in their decision-making process.
Yep. And Meredith G gives us Richard, I already read. Richard Bier, is this the one? No. Meredith G gives us $5 and says, HBR News 441, honey for the Badgers, hate crime were always a backdoor to taking away our rights. And if my recollection is correct, that the victim of the crime that ushered in these laws was involved in criminal activities, so the whole thing was predicated on a lie. All right, thank you, Meredith. So the victim of the crime. Oh yeah. And so yeah, the whole thing is predicated on a lie. That's right. Richard Bier gives us $5. Now I'm catching up. Says, Hannah, those perpetrators are all executed, but the various activists, were complaining that they weren't charged with a hate crime, as even execution in absence of being charged and convicted of a hate crime on top was somehow insufficient for the crime. There is the notion that no religious symbols should be allowed on government property. I mean, I'd be okay with that as a law. I don't know, like,
yeah,
unless you live in a theocracy or something, you know.
There's a lot of courthouses that have the 10 Commandments and things like that people have objected to the 10 Commandments being up.
Yeah.
And I don't know. There's people that argue that our laws are based on the 10 Commandments, but we don't actually. I think they haven't read them if they believe that. Like, there's a few of the commandments that we have laws that are the same. And then there are some that, like, there's no law against envy, for instance. And there's no law against being disrespectful toward your parents. So
Well,
failing to honor your parents.
And the First
Yeah.
Amendment, the First Amendment is, I guess, violates the first 4 commandments, which are all, you have to follow this God or else. And the First Amendment is, no, you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like it doesn't have to be in the courtrooms for people who follow those commandments.
Well, I guess
to honor them and such.
Yeah. Well, I
Like,
think public
it's
buildings.
really
I think
unnecessary.
I can get behind the idea that if you display religious imagery in a public building, like a government building, it's like taking a stance. And maybe it's better that you don't, or just leave it up to the states. I mean, I don't know. But that way, you know, you don't have to worry about Satanists or trolls making up a religion so they can just put it in the space to piss everybody off. Because I think that's
I
what
would
the
just like to
Satanists-
see. I would just like to see consistent enforcement of one law in particular that is the same as one of the commandments, and it's the one that everybody gets wrong. Like everybody thinks that there's a commandment that says that you can't lie. That's
Well,
wrong.
thou shalt not
There's
bear
not.
false witness.
Against thy neighbor. In other
Yeah.
words, thou shalt not lie about another person.
Yeah.
So when someone says, "How are you feeling?" and you say fine, and actually you're a hair shy of suicidal, that's a lie. But you're not going to hell for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you say the guy down the street raped me in the middle of the night last night and it never happened, that's bearing false witness against your neighbor.
Mhm.
That you're going to hell for, right? That's the difference. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, now if you say that guy stole all of my rare coin collection and they can prove that it's not true, the court will come down on you for perjury and filing false complaints with the police and anything else that you've done that's a violation of the law, in order to punish you and discourage you from doing that again. But if you're a woman and you say that guy raped you and they prove that it's false, that you knew that didn't happen when you said it, nothing happens to you. That
Yep.
needs to change. I would like to see that consistently enforced.
Richard Bier gives us $5 super chow and says, and if prohibition of any and all religious displays on public property were to be properly enforced, then it would include the prohibition of radical gender ideology and other pseudo-religious displays with all the flavors of critical theory, whether it be about race or gender ideology. Well, that's the current battle is like over, you know, critical theory being essentially treated as a religion. And there's a lot of strong evidence that supports that. So that would be great. I'm all for that. I'm here for it. Thank you, Richard. Great Indoors gives us $10 super chow and says, this just in, Satan has pledged to reduce CO2 emissions of the 9 circles of hell by roasting souls on an electric stove from now on. Not to be outdone by this blatant PR stunt from down under, heaven has also chipped in and promised to install 100 new windmills in the clouds. Yes. And I got a super chat from Albatross for $5, and he says, my super chat from yesterday's show, writers / activists / etc. go surprise Pikachu face when the men they told to F off actually F'd off. So frustrating. Yes. And I think that's it. I feel like there was more, but yes, no, we got all of these. All right. Well, thank you guys for the super chows and chats. And if you send any Rumble rants, I'm certainly got my eyes out for those. We're going to move on to the next story. So, this one comes from Campus Reform. Florida International University in Miami has eliminated its division of diversity, equity, and inclusion in response to a state mandate. The Florida state mandate. The Florida Department of Education voted to ban public funds from being used for programs that, quote, categorize individuals based on race or sex for the purpose of differential or preferential treatment, end quote. The decision ensures that taxpayer funds can no longer be used to promote DEI, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DIE, as I like to call it, on Florida's 28 state college campuses. The move aligns with a broader initiative to refocus higher education on academic integrity and a factual account of the nation's past, rather than ideological consideration.
Yeah, they're just gonna rename it. You all know that, right? Just like the people pushing for ESG are already discussing how to talk about ESG without calling it ESG. The people pushing for DEI are just gonna give it a different initialism and claim it's a different thing. It's a perpetual cycle of word fuckery. It's the Escherian euphemism treadmill, and we're not even at the beginning of that cycle. Not by a long chalk. Diversity is a euphemism for racism. Equity is a euphemism for wealth redistribution. And inclusion is a euphemism for exclusion. The whole thing is a euphemism for socialism, which is itself a euphemism for communism, which is itself a euphemism for oikophobia. And yes, that is the end of the line. They can't turn that into a euphemism. That's why they just expunged it from everyone's vocabulary. Successfully, I might add, because the very existence of such a concept remains a mystery to most people. Yes, I find myself repeating myself, but I have to because people still aren't getting it. In this press release, like you said, there's this statement: the aim is to provide students with an accurate and factual account of the nation's past, rather than exposing them to radical woke ideologies. End quote. They're still using that euphemism in an official press release. It doesn't matter if you're calling it radical, as long as you're still calling it woke, because they'll just go, oh, what does woke even mean? And that is a valid question, just as valid as asking, what does it mean to be perceived as a hate crime? And to FIU's credit, they do attempt to define what they seem to mean by woke elsewhere in the text, as you also said. Quote, programs that categorize individuals based on race or sex for the purpose of differential or preferential treatment. But that's exactly what these assholes think they're fighting against, because they think everything by default is white supremacy and misogyny. Therefore, surely all they're doing is leveling the playing field. Do you think they can't get around that definition with another lexical conjuring trick? Individuals, we don't categorize individuals. We're concerned with the bigger picture. Collective masses of oppressed bodies. It's perfectly fine to chant from the river to the sea, inshallah, as long as you're not directing it at an individual, do you see? And you can't even sack me for saying that. You're gonna have to find some plagiarism. And they'll find some other dodgy initialism that they all agree encapsulates this new definition and gets around whatever it needs to get around. They're very good at naming the problem, albeit in the form of their needlessly wordy leftist memes. Well, the antidote to garrulousness is laconicity. A small amount of words that get straight to the point is how you defeat an excessive amount of buggering about with postmodern jargon. And the antidote to an entrenched one-way system is to open up a second lane in your vocabulary. You just need to outline both extremes of whatever is deemed unacceptable discourse. Just say, we will not tolerate misogyny or misandry. We will not tolerate xenophobia or oikophobia. End of message. Send tweet. Because the only response they'll have to that is misandry and oikophobia don't even exist. We haven't even heard of that second one. And that's when you fire those motherfuckers, because they have just definitively exhibited misandry and oikophobia. If you can't even acknowledge that a form of bigotry even exists, then you are that kind of bigot. Now, some of you might say misogyny doesn't exist, and we could sit here splitting hairs about the applicable context, but it's kind of a moot point anyway, because I'm guessing none of you particularly want a job in a university. So
I've had a job in a university. It's not all it's cracked up to be, but just saying, I'm one of those people that I don't think misogyny actually exists, or at least I'll say real misogyny has never been tried either. But as far as the law is concerned, you know, it's good that they're saying public funds cannot be used for this. I have the same skepticism you do, Mike. I don't know. They'll find ways to try to get around this, and or they'll just ignore it. They'll say they're complying. So unless the federal government or the state government, you know, whichever, it's the state law, unless the state comes in and inspects and double checks to make sure that they're not actually doing the thing that this law forbids, it's going to continue. And it's why I will say, you know, you can't solve problems like this with government solutions. The only government solution would be to take the government out of it altogether by saying that state funds don't get used for public education beyond the secondary level. And then, of course, they'll attack secondary schools. All right, state funds don't get used for those either. All right, that would solve the problem. Get it out of the government. Get the government out of the schools. And
the problem isn't the. Oh, go ahead.
Then individual parents will have to pay attention to what's going on in their schools before the schools start transitioning their children or teaching them that their race, their ethnic background, whatever, makes them bad people because they're the wrong one, or otherwise imposing all of this diversity, inclusion, and equity bullshit on them, because the parents would actually be as involved in the school system as they were 50 years ago, when it was pretty normal to see one walk into the school for something, and parent-teacher conferences, like, you'd see lines of parents showing up waiting to speak to the teacher. And PTA meetings, you'd actually see parents and not just teachers at the PTA meetings, which today isn't really the case anymore.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, basically, the best you could hope for, honestly, is that the government pulls funding. I mean, there's not much else they can do, but that's like the best thing they can do, because this shit can't sustain itself on, like, you know, in another way other than using taxpayer dollars. The only way. As far as them working around it, it'll be the same as, like, you know, the critical race theory thing, where people were like, you know, they would be like, you can't be teaching critical race theory in schools, and of course the teachers would be like, ha ha, herder, we don't teach critical race theory in schools. Who told you that we do that? And what they're missing is, and the activists are right, they're not teaching it literally. It's just the method by which they teach anything else. So you can't teach critical race theory. It's not something you teach to children, just like gender theory or any of this other stuff. It is a lens through which you teach everything. So and this is the thing, like, the problem is just like Gamergate. The problem was not about the ethics. The problem was with the ideology. And if you don't do something about the ideology, if you don't start, like, taking the money out, and you have to be very vigilant and watchful over what they're teaching these kids and how they're running their colleges and their middle schools and their high schools and all of that, it's just going to keep happening, because the problem is the ideology. But you can defund it, and I'm all for that. That's okay. That's a start, but it's certainly not the solution. The problem is there are too many people within the system that are too corrupted by the system. What was that?
Defund everything.
Yeah, defund everything. Like Vivek said, take a chainsaw and get rid of the Department of Education. Yes, but not just, don't stop there. You got to do something about, because there's all these for-profit universities that have people that work there that learned of all of their critical theory shit in the Department of Education. And by the way, that is wokeness. Wokeness is simply critical consciousness. You got to go and delve into that a little bit to get an expansive version, but essentially it is the way you see the world in terms of these inverted hierarchies that are imagined because they're inversions of hierarchies that don't actually exist, that you think exist, and you're using a critical theory oriented like rhetoric to essentially convince yourself and everyone else that these hierarchies exist and have to be subverted by you. And of course it's all about like the revolution, so it's critical consciousness, that's all. But the critical consciousness is not something that you can write into a curriculum or into like a book that someone teaches. It's the way that the teachers teach. It's how they teach their students. It's how they organize their organizations and institutions. It's who they hire. They have this thing called stochastic entryism, right? Where they say we're going to hire based on DEI, and they make DEI the focus, and then they hire people, and those people know that they're only getting that job because of DEI, and so they start to believe that DEI is the only way they could get work, in this particular field. So they are also woke because they're like more likely to be woke because they think that it's necessary for them to have a job. And because they're all involved in this and they're all on this woke shit, they also believe that the only way they can keep a job is if they continue to be woke and double down on wokeness and look for like isms and phobias everywhere and always find it, because that's what they're supposed to do. That's what critical consciousness does. Like if you miss the bus, when you're going to class and it makes you 5 minutes late, that's because of systemic oppression, because that's what you're programmed to find it in everything, no matter how incidental. If it rains, it's patriarchy. This is why feminists make ridiculous arguments. They legitimately believe them most of the time, and it's because that they're conditioned to think of the world in this way, and they have no agency, which is narcissism, because they think it's all about them all the time. So I'm glad that they're defunding them, but this is not gonna stop anything. You definitely have to, I guess to the degree that government can do anything, that's basically it. All they can do is take away the funding. So I guess there's that. But it's got to happen at the bottom level. It's got to happen on the micro level. So that's the only way that's going to change. But it's, I'm happy for this to happen. That's all my thoughts on that. I got a big super chow. A couple of them, I think. Let me go up. Let's see. Okay. Richard Bier. Click on that. Put it up there. Okay. Richard Bier gives us $5 and says, I wonder if the blindfolded Lady Justice statue would be considered a religious symbol. I don't know. It's kind of, the United States architecture is based in Roman stuff, but I don't think that anyone actually gives tithes to. And plus, I don't think that we actually acknowledge justice in this country as much as we used to either.
It's not supposed to be a deity figure or a figure of religious significance. It's supposed to symbolize the fact that justice is blind to everything but the evidence and the logic, as opposed to who has money, who is considered mover and shaker in society versus who is poor and who is a nobody in society. Like that's all it's about. And it doesn't really have anything to do with anything that would be considered religious.
Yeah, he's on paper. Richard Bier gives us $5 and says,
it's a reminder of how the court system is supposed to operate.
Yeah, it's supposed to be about how it's supposed to. Richard Bier gives us $5, thank you, and says, Hannah, if the woman lies about grape to cover up infidelity, wouldn't she be guilty of breaking 2 commandments?
Yes.
And then I got another one from Winter, gives us $5 and says, yeah, I know of someone who joined and promoted Satanism just to troll the Christians, even though they didn't truly believe. Well, yeah,
I met a lot of people like that.
If you really believed in Satan, that he existed or he exists, why would you follow him? Because you'd have to believe in God, and if you believe in God, you believe in God's wrath. So I think it's just to be, it's just to be contrarian or opposition to Christianity. I mean, it's like Nobody's gonna make like, you know, the opposite of Muhammad, because they wouldn't take that shit. Whatever. I mean, I guess that's still Satan, but you know, you can't do that shit in an Islamic country. All right. Richard BR gives us $5 and says, a thing about PTA meetings is that they gradually went into the direction where some parents were either not permitted to attend or discouraged from attending, and then the parents who would attend would be the ones who went along with the school/activist teachers' agendas. Basically, having only the mean girls clique at the meetings as parents who wanted their pet agendas advanced, no matter how the rest of the school acted. Well, you could also say that taking fathers out of the equation is part of that too.
Yeah, when communities started tolerating concerned parents being hauled out of parent-teacher meetings for being, or conferences, not conferences, but the big parent-teacher meetings, the community parent-teacher meetings, for asking questions that were inconvenient to the administrators, like that should have stopped immediately. That should have resulted in the recall of those administrators when that started happening. And when people started putting up with that, that was the beginning of the end of the public education system.
Yep. All right. Thank you guys for the super chows. We're going to move on to the next story. Let us guys think about this comment. Gilda Yazzie, a former vice president of the National Organization for Women, now a feminist organization, a powerful one in case, has been granted permission to take her racial discrimination case against the feminist group to trial. Yazzie alleges that she was harassed, barred from the office, and removed from her position as vice president because of racism on the part of the former, now president, Tony Van Pelt, patriarch. Now denied any racist motivations, claiming Yazzie's termination resulted from mismanagement of company money and an inability to fulfill job duties. A federal judge has refused to dismiss the case, allowing it to proceed to trial. Yazzie hopes that her case will hold now accountable and affect positive change in the organization. Wow.
what kind of racism are we talking about? I haven't been furnished with an indication of this woman's phenotype.
Oh well, I'll tell you in a second. I'll look it up real quick. She's not white. Is if that's what you're wondering. But let's see.
I don't even know what.
I tried to look her up before, and she's like I tried to look her up before. Yeah, she's looks Indian or something. I'll share a picture. How about that? Share a picture.
Yeah, I did look her up, and it was hard to determine like what ethnic background she has, what race she is from just looking at her picture, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she's not of a non-white race, like a race that's considered non-white anyway.
She looks like Brown Hannah. Is anyone else seeing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of, sort of.
It's like that guy
Overcooked Hannah.
That guy on Twitter who makes it.
That's what I look like Chinese when I get a really dark tan.
Yeah.
So, I would bet though with her jewelry and everything that she's maybe got
a Native
American heritage.
Yeah, Native American.
But it's also possible that she's more like toward the
like the
Far Eastern European or Western Asian, which if you get a DNA test and you have Native American heritage, it doesn't come out always and say Native American. They've created this category of Western Asian for some reason to so that would still be the same kind of genetic heritage, but it's interesting to see this happen. And
he's just another Nikki Haley. She was bullied for her brownness. Nikki Haley was, and Elizabeth Warren.
Something that happens in communities where there's actually a prevalent Native American population. There are some benefits that you get if you are somebody that maybe grew up on a reservation, like it wouldn't be something that I'm very slightly more Native American than Pocahontas, not enough to be like, hey, I'm an Indian, you know, but you know, whatever you want to say in terms of you know, the type of terminology you'd use for that, it wouldn't apply to me. Not in terms of any kind of, I don't have any history of being discriminated against for it or anything like that. But if I wanted to say somebody did, it would be just as hard for them to debunk that as it would if I had grown up on a reservation or anything, right? And I've run into people who have been in areas in New York or areas in like the northeastern part of the United States where there's a lot more tribal representation from the Six Nations, and there, because of a little bit of conflict between maybe business owners and people who they're not allowed to discriminate against, or people who you can find this out in Canada too. There are some things that are not taxed if you're Native American or indigent. So people get mad about it, and there are racial slurs that I won't introduce because we're on YouTube and they would probably shut our channel down for that, that are specific to people who get those tax breaks, that you only hear from people who have to do extra work because of those tax breaks, or any other kind of benefit like that. And yeah, tribal representation has diminished greatly in New York. A lot of people have gone out west because of sort of the it's not so much conflict as like a hostile environment with people. And as a result of that, there is some discrimination that goes on. It's very possible that her case is fully legitimate. It's also possible that it is absolute bullshit.
Well,
And
I mean, they're saying that she
was-
misused funds, and there's one
Right.
thing I've noticed.
It's very possible that that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't really, you know what? It doesn't matter to me. This is just feminists fighting feminists. Like, this is what always happens, you know, like this kind of ideology and these state-funded GMOs, they invite corruption, and then corruption happens, and then they all fight each other over the scraps. And that's kind of what I think is happening here. I think that there's a pretty good chance this woman misappropriated funds or engaged in some kind of scam, and then another woman found out, or like whatever, and now because the current president is a dude, she's like, oh, I'm gonna sue the pants off of this guy. He's a man, he doesn't stand a chance. And so I don't know, I don't even care. I think they're all corrupt.
Well, like I said, live by the sword, die by the sword. When you base how you treat other people on who is white, who is not white, and you know, or who is black, who is not black,
or who is a woman and who is a man. I mean,
who is a woman, who is not a woman. If there is such a thing anymore as being not a woman, because you can't say that either, right? But
you can't even say what a woman
anything
is.
like that. If you base your whole outlook and your whole treatment of other people on, again, those characteristics that we once would have deemed immutable, you make yourself vulnerable to having that used against you, especially if you also advocate believing allegations against people, whether they are founded or not. And so now she's made an allegation. They have to believe her.
Mm-hmm.
So
anyway.
I'm amused by this, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's amusing too.
But at the same time, I like this is an example of what happens when you run your organization on these, I guess you can call them principles.
These pillars.
Yeah.
These ideological pillars. Yeah.
That's belief systems.
Yep. Gonna get. Anyway, let us know what you guys think about this one in the comments. I got a super chow from Richard Bier. Again, he gives us $5 and says, but punctuality and performance standards are at work are who white supremacy and racism. Indeed they are. Which is why she might win, actually. I mean, the president or the president's a man. She is a woman of color. That's basically like getting, like free of a kind, I think, as far as poker hands go, and he's just got nothing. So we'll see what happens.
Yep.
But let us know what you guys think about this in the comments. And now we're going to get to the last story, which is kind of a doozy. So, we have a half hour, so I think this will work. All right. Shout out to Mike J for help doing the write-up for this. So, a family flees the United States back to their homeland of India after a teacher at their daughter's school goes too far with her gender identity obsession. This story centers around the family's daughter, Tia. Note that her name, as well as the names of others who have been changed, or the names have been changed for anonymity reasons. While Tia, this is not a real name, and her family have declined to speak to any and all media, they have given permission to their friends and acquaintances to tell their story. Tia, by all accounts, was a normal 10-year-old girl. That is, until she encountered her new teacher, Mrs. A. Tia's new teacher was, by all available metrics, a good teacher and was well liked. District administrators called her exceptional. She was thought highly of by the parents whose children she had taught, and she was even seen as a leader amongst other teachers, some of which she even helped train. But Mrs. A was not without her quirks. A fellow teacher whom she worked with noted a weird habit. She'd constantly be pulling a few girls to the side to talk. It was almost always girls of diverse ethnicities. She'd put her arms around them a lot. It got to the point where one of the girls started dressing like her and acting like her. It was extremely odd. End quote. Mrs. A was also an avowed advocate of gender ideology and a staunch supporter of the LGBT community. She praised her school district for their policy, which did not allow parents to pull their children out of Pride Month related curricula, a practice she worked to implement where she currently taught. She, along with the principal of the school, led a staff meeting in 2022 discussing the school's new LGBTQ secrecy policy. One teacher she worked with said the following about the meeting, quote, "She and the principal had put together a slideshow saying you have to do this. They implied that if we didn't comply, we would lose our jobs or be arrested. It got my attention. Mrs. A went over the data management system to show how we could hide information from parents about name and gender. One teacher spoke up in the meeting, but was shot down and shamed for even asking a question. I had not heard of any of this before," end quote. This is around the time that Tia enters the story. Rachel Hamill's daughter, one of Tia's classmates, noted that it was around this time that Tia had caught Mrs. A's eye. Mrs. A kind of started to spend much more time with her. She would be sitting next to her when she was teaching. She would be near her at recess. They had a lot of private conversations. No one can be sure of when the subject of gender transition came up during their discussions, but two of her classmates and a local mother recall a time when Tia, who was wearing a traditional style Indian dress, complained to Mrs. A that it itched. Mrs. A posited to Tia that maybe she did not like the traditional female dress because she was not a girl and was actually a boy instead. Shortly afterwards, Mrs. A, along with Tia, informed her class that Tia had changed her name as well as her pronouns. She would be going by the name Felix, and her pronouns were now he, him, they, them. And most importantly, no one outside of school was to know about this change. The change was shared with the rest of the school. An internal email from Mrs. A read that Tia, quote, has opened up to me has opened up to me these past few months and has just requested this change. This change is his right and is not to be questioned, end quote. The email also indicated that the school was not to change her name on their electronic roster in order to keep her parents unaware. Rachel Hamill stated, quote, the girls would never be allowed to say her real name in front of Mrs. A because Mrs. A would correct them. Because of this, Hamill's daughter stopped hanging out with Tia outside of school and on the playground. She didn't know how to act, end quote. In one class field trip, Tia's mother volunteered to chaperone. Tia's class was instructed by Mrs. A to refer to Tia by her original name for the day. But when one of the students slipped up and referred to Tia as Felix, Tia's mother grew very concerned. The mother of the daughter who made the mistake recalls the situation. Quote, her mom was confused and asked her to call Tia by her normal name. It was very confusing for my daughter. She was wondering why the girl was lying to her mom, end quote. Another incident occurred at another mother's house when Tia, the mother's daughter, and a mutual friend were working in a group assignment. The mother explains what happened. Quote, a little bit later, maybe in May, my daughter and a friend were both at the house working on a group project that Tia was also involved in. They were explaining each of their parts, and when they got to the point of Tia's part, my daughter suddenly didn't know how to discuss her. She started doing this thing where she'd be looking up and would try to keep things straight, saying, we were outside of school, so it's she, but she got to the point where she was hyperventilating. And I was watching this and I felt like, holy cow. I stopped her and told her just to be kind and respectful, and I gave her permission not to participate in this. No, Mom, we have to, or else we'll get in trouble, Davis's daughter retorted as her friend nodded. You have to say it the right way. They both had tears in their eyes at this point. And my daughter's friend said, quote, and we're not supposed to tell our parents, quote. As many of the parents in the district had started hearing that supposedly a student had transitioned genders, Tia's parents were still unaware. All they noticed was how miserable and reserved their daughter had become. Another mother recalls Tia's change in mood. Quote, she wasn't eating well, her sleep was affected, she saw a dark cloud over her daughter, and her daughter wanted to talk only to Mrs. A, even at night and on weekends, end quote. This is around the time Tia finally broke. During a phone call between Tia's mother and another classmate's mother, Tia approached her mother and explained everything. The other mother recalls the conversation stating the following, quote, her daughter had come to her and was crying and very upset. She was saying she wants to go to school, see her friends like normal, and doesn't want to be a boy anymore. But Tia was afraid that Mrs. A would be mad at her and wouldn't like her anymore. Her mom was like, what are you talking about? End quote. From there, Tia's mother decided to directly confront Mrs. A. Once Mrs. A understood what Tia's mother was there for, she immediately began to ignore her and focused on Tia. Tia's mother then approached both the school counselor and the school principal, but received mostly the same response. The principal, according to a local mother, informed her that, quote, Mrs. A had done nothing wrong and was just following school policies. They treated her like she was crazy and had no grounds, end quote. It was then decided by Tia's mother and father that both Tia and her younger brother would be pulled out of school and to be taken out of the state for the time being. A friend of the family recalls the situation. Quote, the family is very scared. They were struggling and had no idea what to do. The dad had just wanted to get away from everything and forget that it ever happened. There's a lot of shame and a lot of, how could we let this happen to our child and we didn't know. Quote, while the family took refuge out of state, the school did not stop contacting them. They received multiple emails from school staff asking where the children were. Mrs. A also attempted to contact Tia, telling Tia she could live with her. Oh my God. Eventually, Tia and her family moved back to India. One last revelation would come a year later, in the summer of 2023, when a local activist and mother of a student in the same area received an anonymous parcel. The parcel, which was hand-delivered to her mailbox, consisted of page after page of printed emails. All of these emails were from the school's internal email system, and they all had to do with Tia. Most of the emails were sent after the family fled to Oregon, with some being from the school administration, but the bulk of them were from Mrs. A. Some of the highlights of these emails from Mrs. A to Tia are as follows, quote, make sure this email is deleted too when we are done, because otherwise when your mom looks, you'll be outed instantly. Another one reads, I kept emailing you, but I was worried your mom interfered before you saw my messages. Another one read, I was all so serious I would take you into my own home anytime you need. Another one read, you need to get a personal email set up so we still have a way to communicate. And one more, I'm worried you're going to leave and I will never be able to be reached. That's the end of that story.
There's not much to add, really. The story very much speaks for itself, and kudos to Mike for actually telling as much of the story that needs to be told. What I will add is, can you imagine if Tia's parents, as a result of their actions in response to this grooming, and I can't help but worry that even grooming is a euphemism of insufficient descriptive detail. It's torture, mental and psychological torture, with the ultimate goal of physical torture, painful and irreversible physical torture. Does anyone doubt that Mrs. A would not be satisfied until Tia was on a hospital bed under a menacing array of syringes and scalpels? Well, can you imagine if Tia's parents were arrested and sent to prison for 7 years because of their decision to attempt to save their daughter from this cruel and unusual torture? Well, could that possibly happen? Well, that's exactly what can now happen in Scotland by law. Let that sink in if you even can. It's not just teachers, by the way, who have this absolute power. If your child is walking to school and some sweaty clown in a panel van pulls up and goes, "Hey kid, you want a sex change?" The same shit applies. If your children decide to join this cult of body horror for any reason, you cannot forbid them from doing so, or even advise them against doing so, or you'll go to prison for longer than a rapist, for infinitely longer than the clown in the panel van. They're not even breaking the law, not in Scotland. You are breaking the law for not letting the child torturers torture your child. Consider this a warning to the rest of the world. I personally find it particularly perturbing because I have 3 infant nephews currently residing in Scotland, and I don't think anyone in my family even knows about this recent change to the law, because God knows they're not going to hear about it on the TV, and they wouldn't believe me if I told them until it's already far too late. So yeah, I can't even describe it in words. Best I can do is a sound.
Yeah, a lot of people have tried to deny that what's going on in the schools is grooming, but a key element of grooming is talking the child into a mentality of the groomer and the child versus everybody in the child's life whose job is to protect the child, and in particular, our parents. Like, it's hard to sit and read or listen to being read a story like this because it has so many parallels to what a pedophile does. And I have memories of that. I'm not going to say I'm triggered. I don't really get triggered anymore. But holy fuck, guys. If you have been through this, you know what I'm talking about. Like, this is almost exactly the same, except that email didn't exist when I was a kid. But that kind of, you got to find a way to talk to me without your parents. You've got to find a way to hide this from your parents. You've got to find a way to protect our relationship from your parents because they're the bad guys. That is grooming. That is predatory. That is not fighting for somebody's right. That is not fighting for the student. That is not protecting trans kids, that is imposing a mental health condition. Gender dysphoria is a mental health condition. It is distress. It is a type of body dysmorphic disorder, right? It is not just a characteristic. It's not a fun thing for people to go through. And to impose something like that on a child so that you could use the child for an agenda is, I would say, actually more predatory than just overt molestation. Like, this is molestation plus. And it should be prosecuted as such. These parents are really lucky that they could take their child and leave the country, right? There's another story that is, in my opinion, even more disturbing, because the state is actually acting against the parents. Montana has had their child protective services has removed a child from the family's home because the parents were not supporting transitioning. Right? This is not a 17-year-old that may or may not understand what they're doing. This is an elementary school kid.
Yeah, Canada has a law. There's a law in the books on help. They can take your kids from you. Like, respect their pronouns.
The Montana one is a 14-year-old, so she's like 8th grade, right? 8th grader. A kid who is not old enough to drive a car, not old enough to go on a date with a boy without parental supervision, right? Not old enough that if the parents left her home alone for more than an hour or two, the state would consider that okay, right? Not old enough to have a job without parental permission. Not old enough to go to an NC-17 movie or an R movie, but old enough to decide she wants her tits cut off.
Yep.
That's the world we live in right now.
Yep.
And quite likely talked into it by someone who calls herself an educator. That's not education. It is conversion therapy.
Absolutely. Like Mike said, it's psychological torture. And I will also add that I think one of the things that people have to pay attention to is that this is just the one that we know about. And one of the things that I see a lot when I see a lot of people talking about, like, grooming children, it's almost always they're worried about men doing it. There's plenty of women that do it. Like, if it happens in the schools, what percentage of teachers are women? I'm just saying that they have to be a part of this, and you're just gonna have to face some dark realities. There's a dark side to women, and this is how it can be expressed.
This is their way of being compliant with something that is politically correct but not correct. And it's something, when I say conversion therapy, I don't know, a lot of people may not understand this, but in the LGBTQ community, right, the whole alphabet soup community, the phrase conversion therapy, the term conversion therapy actually has a connotation that is similar to like torture camps, because that's essentially, it is gaslighting. It's taking people who have a natural tendency to be different in some way or another from the norm, from sexual norms, or to have gender dysphoria, and gaslighting them. And then, of course, it also over time involved more brutal methods, physical torture, and including, in some cases, rape. It was pretty horrible. and it was actually standard, right? It was something that was done as we're trying to help these people, so no bad methods, only bad motivations. So as long as we have a good motivation for this, our methods are okay. And that's basically what's being done here, except instead of toward homosexuality, or instead of toward being straight, it's away from being straight. Instead of toward identifying as the sex of your birth, it's away from identifying as the sex of your birth. And again, it's no bad methods, only bad intentions, right?
Yeah.
Except if
There are
you're
no bad methods, only bad targets.
Yeah, if you are LGBT and LGBTQ, if you're in the alphabet soup mafia and you accept this kind of behavior, you're not real in terms of your beliefs. You're as the person that you're pretending to be, the community that you're pretending to be part of. You are every bit as bad as the people who did it to young gay and lesbian men and women, boys and girls, people with gender dysphoria, people who had different ideas about what they enjoyed in terms of like fetishes and things like that were harmless, that people that tortured them for who they were are no different from you.
Yeah.
For those that don't accept it, we actually have to be noisy. Stand up, say this isn't us, this isn't who we are, this isn't what we accept, and this doesn't represent us. And you can't, whether Gamergate goes on forever or not your shield has to go on forever. Because shit like this being done to children, like these kids are going to be suicidal when they get older. They're going to be messed up for the rest of their lives. Even if they're not conned, scammed into transitioning, even if they're not scammed or conned into sexual liaisons that they don't really feel and don't really like, that aren't really something they would consent to if fully informed and just able to make their own decisions without adult interference. Even if they don't go through those experiences, just the act of being gaslighted, just the experience of being gaslighted in this way is enough to fuck up your head to the degree that you will be suicidal for years afterward. And it can make you vulnerable to other types of victimization. These kids, even if 90% of the kids that are subject to this kind of bullshit don't change who they think they are for any period of time, they're still going to be easier to target. Most of them will have their boundaries, their personal boundaries, their understanding of not other people's boundaries, but their understanding of their own personal boundaries, where they can say no to things and enforce it if somebody refuses to listen when they say no. Most of these kids are going to have difficulty with that for the rest of their lives, and they're going to get walked on in various ways. They may be victimized by scammers. They may be victimized by other sexual predators that are going to come along, because this is a type of sexually predatory behavior. And a small few of them will go in the other direction, and they will become predators because of this. The teachers that are doing this to our students are creating future victims, current victims, and future predators.
Yep.
And you should all be scared. And this is terrifying to me, not just for the kids, but for what's going to happen in the future when their particular dysfunction that has come from this is we're not, we see this happening to one or two kids that make the news. but those one or two kids that make the news, each of those has like 30 classmates. And they have a school that they were attending that has, 5 or 6 other grades, depending on whether it's got a kindergarten, whether their 6th grade is part of their junior high, and that school system has a policy that is affecting the kids in those classes. And if it's in an urban area, there may be, if it's an elementary school, there could be several other elementary schools in that same urban area with the same policy, and teachers doing that to students in those schools as well. And if it's not just a school board policy in that municipality, but a policy in the state, then you're talking about statewide. You're talking all the kids in an entire state during their elementary school years being subjected to this gaslighting. And those are the kids that are going to be eligible for military service in about 8 to 12 years. Maybe a little less.
Yeah.
Those are the kids that are going to be waiting on you at fast food places that you go to. Those are the kids that are going to be getting their first jobs as state tested nurses' aides and nursing homes, taking care of your parents, or your grandparents if you're really young.
Going to be teachers.
Yep, those are the kids going into the public education system. And those are the kids that are going to become the next generation of cops, right? The next generation of bureaucrats in government. The next generation to run for city council in your communities. Right? They're the ones that you're going to be depending on to keep the electricity going, to make sure that there is still a sanitation system in your community. All of that is being affected by this gaslighting. So it's not just these kids are victims. I mean, this whole society is going to be relying on these kids 20 years from now, maybe less, 15 years from now, some of them. And they're going to be fucked in the head. And you're going to be too old to do anything about it.
Yep.
To sort of wire this back into the first story, there's some discussion around this subject as to whether this shit counts as a religion. By some accounts, it does count because it involves supernatural superstition. You can change physical reality just by verbally insisting that reality is what you say it is. If saying an incantation over a wafer makes it physically change into the body of Christ, if that's a kooky element of religion, then it pales in comparison to this, where you literally can say a bunch of incantations over a female body and it becomes a male body, or a male body and it becomes a female body. But I think it's completely barking up the wrong tree. To even split hairs as to what is and is not a religion, or what is and is not a cult. None of that is important. It's like, I don't care what your religion is, if it's a neo-religion or an ancient religion. If you're torturing children, then I don't care what else you call it. Just don't torture children. I mean, is it really that complicated?
Yep. I got it. Appreciate that. I got some super chat chows. Or I got a super chat and a super chat. First, Richard BR gives us $5 and says, I did miss it. Well, there is one up here. What is the action looking like that if you showed Mrs. A videos of people walking away from the camera, that she could pick out every single one who had been previously victimized away? like was done with other predators who were asked they would target based on watching them walking away from the predators. Somehow managed to choose each and every single person who had been victimized previously. Well, I don't think this girl has been, but her parents were certainly maybe not involved enough, or they were too trusting. And I think because the father clearly has regrets, I think he's very, very ashamed and guilty. But fortunately, well, we don't know actually, like how much to harm. But
They can find the predators like this can figure out who's vulnerable. That's what they figure out. And a lot of times, that vulnerability stems from having been victimized as a child. And it does make it harder for you to judge and resist the next time, because you make excuses to yourself for why you were victimized or why it wasn't that bad or so on. And the grooming process also makes it hard for you to recognize. But it doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, everybody that gets victimized, even multiple times, has a first time.
Yeah.
And like she's working with elementary school kids.
Yep. Rich Beer gives us $5 again and says there's a child in Montana being removed from parents' custody as they aren't affirming the child. There was an officer to place the child with a relative in Wyoming where there is a lower bar for access. The child might be going to the birth mother in Canada. Can't this be categorized as religious indoctrination? Does anyone remember when cults used to sell flowers at airports? Well, Hare Krishnas as a different animal, but yes, that's what we're saying.
Yeah,
that's where the fight
Yeah.
is basically to see it recognized as a religion so that we can like give it the same limitations.
When you do that, you make a rod for your own back if you are of any religious persuasion. Because, well, this is just a religion. And then they'll go, well, you have a religion. You're a Christian. So if you're allowed your thing, why aren't we allowed our thing? And the answer is because you're torturing children.
Yes.
There are some religious people who use their religion as an excuse to torture children. I don't give a fuck. Just don't torture children.
Well, the one good thing about calling it a religion is that the state will not be allowed to enforce it anymore.
Right.
If it's a religion, then the state is not allowed to make people comply with it.
The status religion. Feminism.
Mm-hmm.
I got another super chow from Richard Beer for $5, and he says civilization was nice while we had it. And then I got a super chat from Derek Workman for $5, and he says trans by proxy, let people know. Yes, and I want to say, like, in case you guys don't think I was going there, it is mostly women pushing this stuff. I am making that point. I'm saying that most people, when they talk about the grooming, they only focus on the men. Like the Jeffrey Marshes on TikTok and stuff.
If a male teacher did this, especially a male teacher who doesn't have that fucking gay voice, I mean, if such a man would even be allowed to be a teacher, because we've long since past the point. But if a straight presenting man or even a gay presenting man tried to become a teacher, he would get accused of pedophilia within his first fucking week, and that's why men don't go into teaching anymore, because it's an extremely misandric industry at this point. Men have to walk on eggshells every single day if they want to be a teacher.
Yep.
And it's been that way for a long time, actually. It was that way. My dad's been retired for a long time. Like he was retired for he retired before 1999. He was retired when my son was born. So he was retired for a long time before he passed away, and he had been noticing it for quite some time when he was a teacher. That there hit a point in the early 80s where if there was a student in his room with him, he did not have his door closed at all. Like that was his decision, because then he would be able to demonstrate, that he wasn't alone with a student. And eventually he got to the point where if he was alone in his room, he still had the door open, because anybody could say they were in there. Like that's just during the 80s and 90s, and it got worse from there. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not gonna get better either. You can't fix this by state interference. You can only fix this by parental interference. And in order to fix it by parental interference, you have to eliminate state interference. So it has to become something where the parents have the right to say no to what the school is doing, and parents have the right to pull their child from that school and go to another school. And if there is going to be state funding of schools, then it should follow the student. And if parents do not like what is going on at the school that they are sending their child to, then they should be able to take their child from that school and go to the school of their choice with this child and say, we'd like to enroll here, and here's the information on how to get this child's state funding for this school instead of the school they were attending. And that should be that. The state
Right to jail, right away.
The state should not have any say in it at all.
Yeah. All right. Well, with all that said, I guess we're going to move on to the patron show, end it there. Let us know what you guys think about this in the comments. I know the last story is kind of heavy, but we should know this kind of stuff's going on. So, and share this video with people. Let them know what's going on. Really appreciate that. So, we're going to head into this patron show now and have a little bit of fun with this article. Some internet dork is trying to reclothe beautiful women because of dignity. It is pathetic. Written by K. Smythe, which sounds like a made-up name, but I guess it's
That's
real.
funny.
It's for people who are too posh to call themselves Smith.
Yeah, Smythe. So anyway, if you want to join us, you have to become a patron. Go to feedthebadger.com and set up a monthly subscription. $5 a month will get you into the Discord, where you'll be able to watch all of the additional content in the same way you are now. And if you give it higher levels, you can even be a part of the discussion itself. So thanks guys for coming on the show. If you like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about what we discussed on the show today, and please share this video, because sharing is caring. Thank you so much for coming on today's episode of HBR News, and we will talk to you all in the next one. Take care, everybody.
Are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.